If you were suddenly kidnapped by a violent criminal on the most important night of your life, what would you do? This madman is out for revenge, but his victim says that he's got the wrong guy. Is it a case of mistaken identity, or is there more to the story than he's willing to admit? There's only one way to find out, so I'm gonna break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the maniac in the red suit in Sympathy for the Devil. There's a psycho loose in Sin City, and he's about to take this unsuspecting father for one hell of a ride. Late one night in a neighborhood outside of Las Vegas, this guy David is on his way to meet his pregnant wife at the hospital. She's already in labor, about to give birth to their next child at any minute. After dropping his son off at his grandma's house, he starts to make his way over, knowing that he doesn't have long to get there before the baby is born. As he reaches the strip, he notices that his gas tank is almost empty, but decides that he doesn't have time to stop and presses on. His phone rings, and he can see that it's a call from his wife, quickly picking it up. She sounds like she's in a lot of pain, but David can't do anything other than listen and promise to get there as fast as he can. Finally, David makes it to the hospital's parking garage, and while he's waiting for a spot to open up, he notices this angry-looking guy dressed in a red jacket staring him down. Thinking that he must just be some local degenerate, David parks his car and starts gathering up his things. But no sooner does he let his guard down than the man throws open the door and jumps into his back seat, pointing a revolver straight at his back. Terrified and confused, he asks the man what he wants, ready to hand over any of his personal belongings so that he can get to his wife safely. However, instead of robbing him, he only tells David to pick a card. At first, David doesn't know what to think, but once he realizes that the man isn't messing around, he reluctantly chooses the ace of spades. Chuckling, the man pulls that exact card out of his pocket, saying that he knew David would pick it, before throwing it into his lap and ordering him to drive. David tries to reason with him, explaining that he's having a family emergency as his wife is about to give birth, but the man refuses to hear him out. Leaning forward with a crazed look in his eyes, he tells David that he's his family emergency now, and forces him to drive out of the garage, with no particular directions other than to head back towards the Vegas Strip. Okay, this is a terrifying scenario. David here was just minding his own business, trying to get to his wife in time before she gives birth to their child. And the next thing that he knows, he's being held up by a guy who dresses like the CEO of Big Red Chewing Gum. With luck like that, at least it's a good thing that he didn't make his way over to a blackjack table. But he needs to start making the right moves fast before things go horribly wrong. The truth is that the warning signs started long before the kidnapper here even got into his car. When he was pulling into the parking lot, David noticed the guy staring him down from a nearby entryway, and you could tell from just one glance that this man did not have good intentions. To be fair, if David is just a normal father who isn't involved in any shady dealings, then there's no reason why he should have guessed that the guy would want to come after him. But sometimes, it helps to be paranoid even in the most mundane situations. When pulling into a crowded, low-light area where it's possible that a kidnapper or robber could attack, it's always best to keep your doors locked and the engine running while parked until the moment that you're completely ready to move on to your next destination. After parking the car, it also would have been wise for David to keep a close eye on the man, just in case he actually did have intentions to rob or otherwise harm him, and possibly even search for another parking spot somewhere else in the garage if he felt like he was really in danger. Unfortunately, David was so focused on getting to his wife that he let his guard down much too early, which brings us to the predicament that he finds himself in now. So what would you do if a dangerous person got in your car and told you to drive? Carjackings happen to thousands of people across the United States every year, and your next move in this situation could mean the difference between life and death. The most important thing is to figure out what your attacker's ultimate goal is. If it seems like they're only after your vehicle or money, then it might be best to just play along and try to avoid any further confrontation. However, in David here's case, this man hasn't shown any interest in robbing him, meaning that this most likely is an abduction, and that's where things get even worse. In general, your chances of survival are much lower if you allow a kidnapper to take you to a second location. So, if you're being robbed, comply. But if you think you're being abducted, do anything you can to fight back here and now if that's at all possible. Unfortunately for David, he's about to miss his chance and might not make it out of this alive. What David needed to do here was look for any opportunity to fight back or escape before they left the hospital parking garage. It's going to be risky, but letting the man lead him out of a public place is even more dangerous. And plus, what better place is there to get shot than when you're already at a hospital? He actually has a lot of things going for him here. There should be armed security, plenty of witnesses, and quick access to medical attention if he can escape without being fatally shot. Unfortunately, that's the tricky part, so if he's going to make a move, he'll have to choose his moment very carefully. Since David has young kids, there's always a chance that the back doors are child safety locked, meaning that the man wouldn't be able to open the door and get back out once he closed it. It's much too late to activate them now. With a revolver pointed at his back, it would have been all but impossible to open the door and bail out quickly enough to avoid getting shot. But there was a brief second where the man took his eyes off of David to drink from a flask that he potentially could have capitalized on. You see, in that moment, it's possible that he could have slipped out of the door and stayed low while using the cars for cover, making his way toward the entrance where hopefully he'd lose the man in the crowd and let the local authorities take care of the rest. He's only got 6 shots before he has to reload, if that revolver is even loaded in the first place. So it's time to bob and weave like his life depends on it, because it does. Hopefully he's already intoxicated enough that he'd miss every shot as long as there was enough distance between them, and David here would be home free. It's a long shot, but anything's better than letting this guy lead him out into the middle of the Nevada desert. Unfortunately, it looks like David is going for the ride, and he'll have to find another opportunity to escape. David continues driving aimlessly for a while as the man rummages through his belongings, finding things like his phone, his driver's license, and a brand new baby bottle. Eventually, he gets angry after seeing David look back at him one too many times, and orders him to turn off the main drive onto the highway towards the outskirts of town. That's when David's phone rings with another call from his wife. The man jokingly asks him if he should answer, but he ignores the question and keeps on driving. A little while later, the man finally notices that the gas tank is almost empty, so he tells David to take the next exit and pull into a gas station, saying that they still have a long way to go. Sliding David his card, the man keeps a lookout while he starts fueling up the car, warning him to watch his speeding when they get back on the highway. After coming over to his side of the pump, the man steps in some gum and looks down to scrape it off of the bottom of his shoe. Seeing his opportunity, David silently mouths, "Help me," to a woman nearby, but she gets nervous and decides to ignore him. Just then, the man notices him looking over there and sneaks around to the side of the woman's car, scaring her away. As the woman pulls away, he tells David that he doesn't blame him for trying, saying that it probably seemed like his best shot. The only problem is that he knows where David lives, so even if he does manage to escape, he'll only end up getting his family involved. Realizing that he's cornered for now, David finishes up and they get back in the car, with the man jumping in the passenger seat this time instead. Horror protagonists like the one we see in this video are notorious for making bad decisions. Luckily for you, we're here to steer you in the right direction, just like our friends over at Fume. You see, Fume has your back with their innovative and award-winning device. Say goodbye to the frightening consequences of going cold turkey and say hello to an exciting new way to kick bad habits to the curb. Fume gets it. Not everything about your bad habit is necessarily all bad, just those bad parts. So why not simply eliminate the spooky stuff and keep the good parts? It might not make for a very good movie, but it definitely makes for a great life. This device uses flavored air, not vapor, and offers all natural, delicious flavors instead of harmful chemicals. It's a habit you can indulge in without any of the side effects. There's also a slew of flavor cores for you to choose from. Orange vanilla, sweet and citrusy with a ton of classic vanilla, raspberry lemon, full-bodied lemonade with a hint of berries, sparkling grapefruit, fresh and cooling fruity grapefruit, crisp mint, which is a fan favorite, and more. Don't wait for the next horror movie to give you a wake-up call. Grab Fume and conquer your bad habits in a fun and hassle-free way. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head on over to tryfume.com/howtobeat or scan the QR code and use the code HOWTOBEAT to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. The Fume Solano is launching on November 6th. Upgrade your Journey Pack to the Solano to enjoy the premium walnut barrel and onyx black coated mouthpiece that has a slightly softer finish. Get started now. Okay, this might have been David's last opportunity, since now that the gas tank is full, they'll have no reason to pull over again until they reach their final destination. He needed to take any chance that he had to escape before getting back in the car, and I've got a few ideas in mind. When they first pulled up, the kidnapper here made a critical mistake that could have made all the difference, getting out of the car and closing his door before David did. If David had played this moment correctly, then he might have been able to quickly lock the doors, turn on the car, and floor it out of there. Hopefully he'd be lucky enough not to get hit through one of the windows in the process, and just like that, this whole nightmare would be over. Sure, the guy might know where he lives now that he's seen David's license, but he can't do much while he's stranded at a gas station on the side of the highway. And David should have more than enough time to contact the police and his family to let them all know what's going on. After all, how hard could it be for the police to find a guy with dyed red hair and a matching jacket? If he could get away now, then they'd most likely be able to track the kidnapper down before he was ever able to come after David's family, making it an empty threat. Alternatively, he had another chance to confuse things when he was using his card to pay for the gas. By entering the wrong PIN number, or just making it look like his card wasn't working, they'd end up having to go inside and pay cash before they could fill the tank. And anything that David could do to make things more difficult would only buy him more time and open up more chances to escape. If the two of them went inside, then he could try to signal for the cashier to call the police, or just use the opportunity of them changing locations to run for his life or find a way to fight back against the man with any weapons that he could get his hands on. It's possible that by making enough of a public scene, he'd cause the kidnapper to panic, forcing him to make quick decisions, and with any luck, make a mistake that would create another opportunity. Since the man is armed, the best chances to make a move always come anytime that he looks away, like when he was scraping the gum off of his shoe. At that moment, he was distracted and off balance, which gave David a brief window to make a move. The simplest thing would have been to try rushing straight at him, knocking him off of his feet, and hopefully disarming him. At which point, David could scramble for the weapon and take the upper hand. By making David pump his own gas, the kidnapper unintentionally provided him with a potential weapon, the gas hose itself. By turning the hose on the kidnapper and dousing him with gasoline, with any luck, the liquid would completely render his revolver completely useless, or put him in a position where the spark from firing it would ignite the vapors and cause him to go up in flames. Since David smokes, he also has a lighter on him and could potentially use it to create an impromptu flamethrower to take the kidnapper out. Is there an almost guaranteed chance that this would backfire? Absolutely. And I'll be the first to admit that I really have no idea how it would play out. But this is Vegas, baby! So sometimes you have to roll the dice and let good old Lady Luck figure out the rest. If he's eventually going to kill me anyway, then I'd rather that the both of us go down in a blaze of glory right here than me alone getting dumped in a ditch somewhere out in the desert. Whatever he chose, doing something here would have been better than doing nothing. But it looks like David's ride from hell is only just getting started. Once they're back on the road, the man starts looking through David's glove compartment where he finds pictures of his family. David gets so distracted looking at the photos that he nearly causes a head-on collision with another car, barely managing to turn out of the way just in time. Now the man asks David where he's from, and that's when things start to get really strange. He wants to know if David's ever been to Boston, saying that he reminds him of someone that he knew there who had a bad drinking habit. Denying it, David insists that he hasn't had alcohol in years and swears that he's only been to Boston once for work. For some reason, the man doesn't buy into his story. He guesses correctly that David here stopped drinking about 15 years ago, and suddenly remarks that he wasn't expecting him to make a mistake so early in the night, looking as if he's just caught him in a lie. David changes the subject, asking how much longer it's going to be before he gets to go home, but the man says that he shouldn't assume that he'll ever be going home at all. After a tense silence, he tells David that the trip won't be much longer. They're on their way to Boulder City, where his mother is in the hospital dying from cancer. David tries to relate to him with a story about his own mother, but the man only gets annoyed at his constant interruptions, shouting at him to be quiet. That's when David gets another call from his wife, and this time he tells the man to answer it. They only have a minute to talk before the doctors make her hang up, but it's clear that she's in a lot of pain and worried that she might lose the baby. Confused, she asks David why he isn't there yet, but he only replies that he will be soon, unable to tell her the truth about what's really going on. Just then, David notices a police car on the side of the road just up ahead and subtly speeds up as they drive past, hoping to get the officer's attention. Luckily, it works, but the man quickly realizes what's happening and he is not happy. Nervous, David insists that they need to stop, with the man finally telling him to pull onto a side street up ahead. As the officer pulls up behind them, the man warns David that if he does so much as to look at him funny, then he'll kill him on the spot with no hesitation. To make matters even worse, he gets another call from his wife at the worst possible time. The officer gets to the car and knocks on the windows, going through the usual process of asking David for his license and registration. But the red-haired guy immediately starts demanding to know why they've been pulled over. They argue back and forth about the flow of traffic until the officer finally gets so frustrated that he draws his weapon and orders the man to step out of the car, but that was his biggest mistake. Furious, the man fires a shot from his revolver straight through his pocket, hitting the officer in the chest and knocking him to the ground. After taking the car keys, he steps out and pulls a second gun from behind his back, killing him before taking his handcuffs and getting back in. Okay, I thought for sure this would be David's best shot, but it looks like it turned out to be nothing but another missed opportunity, and even cost that poor police officer his life. David here was too stunned by the craziness of the whole scene, but if he had kept his composure and thought the situation through more tactfully, then this might have been the end of the road for our kidnapper. Here's what I'm thinking. Back on the road before they pulled over, there was an important detail that you might have noticed. David was the only one in the car who was wearing a seatbelt. As soon as the officer pulled out behind him, what he needed to do was slam on his brakes as hard as he could. With any luck, this would have sent the kidnapper here crashing into the dashboard and possibly caused him to drop his weapon from the surprise impact. At the same time, David could have quickly unbuckled himself and dove out of the door into the road, hopefully recovering quickly enough to make a break for his safety. If the kidnapper got his wits back and started shooting, then there's a good chance that the officer would fire back and take care of him. Or at least that the gun battle between the two would cause enough of a distraction for David to escape. Besides that opportunity, he had one more chance when the kidnapper turned his attention to the officer. To be fair, it's got to be incredibly hard to think clearly during such a high-pressure situation. But when the man was standing over the wounded officer and switching from his revolver to his second pistol, he was briefly disarmed for the first time in a while. This gave David a short window where he could have rushed in from behind and hit him with a Goldberg spear, dropping him to the ground and hopefully opening up a chance for he and the injured cop to work together and take this psycho out. The pressure's ramping up, and if this kidnapper's willing to do what he just did, then there's a good chance that he isn't planning on surviving the night either, meaning that David here needs to wake the hell up and capitalize on his next opportunity before it's too late. David is sick to his stomach, knowing that the officer was only doing his job. But the man shows no remorse. He says that it's David's fault for speeding when he directly warned him against it, tossing him the keys and ordering him to get back on the road. At first, David refuses, saying that he could have just destroyed a family, but the man throws the comment back at him, as if he knows that David himself is just as guilty. Suddenly, he fires a shot a few inches away from David's head, telling him that the next one won't be a warning. With no other choice, David turns on the car and they quickly pull away, leaving the officer's body lying in the road. After a bit, the man makes a comment about David's sudden burst of courage, wondering out loud where it could have come from, as if he secretly already knows more about him than he's letting on. Once again, David here changes the subject, calling the man's bluff about the story of his mother being in the hospital and demanding to know the truth. He admits that it's a lie, but won't tell David the real reason for all this just yet, saying that he doesn't want to spoil it. That's when the man decides that he's getting hungry, telling David to pull off at the next exit for some food. Lost in thought, David doesn't respond, and the man senses that he's busy thinking about crashing into something. Leaning forward, he unbuckles David's seatbelt so that he won't try it, but David sees this as an opportunity. The instant that the man looks away, he opens the door and dives out onto the side of the road, hitting the ground rolling with textbook form. Jumping over the front seat, the man reaches for the parking brake and manages to bring the car to a stop just down the road before David has even got to his feet. With nowhere to run, all that David can do is scramble for cover behind a rise of dirt as the man comes looking for him. Just then, David hears his phone ringing, and this time the man answers instead. At first, he claims to be a gift shop worker at the hospital and comes up with a story that David is on the phone with his job, using the store's landline because it has better reception. After finding out what her room number is, he drops the act and starts making insane, vulgar comments until she finally hangs up. Realizing that his wife and child will be next if he tries to run, David makes the only decision that he can and reluctantly gives himself up. Suddenly, the man lunges forward and punches David square in the face, knocking him to the ground before forcing him back towards the car. As he's getting back in the driver's seat, he grabs onto the car's frame and uses it for leverage to pop his shoulder back into place, with the man wondering out loud how a warehouse worker came to learn all of these special skills. Okay, talk about a good idea with a bad execution. If the goal was to end up with a broken collarbone, then you knocked it out of the park with this one. But when your escape attempt only leaves you more injured and still a hostage, David, you f***ed up. You see, jumping out of the car was a great idea, but you couldn't have picked a worse time or place to do it. All the chances that you had driving through town, and you decide to make this move in the middle of nowhere with no place to run and nobody around to help you out? Come on, man! And with such a badass role too. It's a real shame. You could have done this back on the strip when the officer was behind you. Really anywhere would have been better than this back road with no traffic or cover. But it gets worse. To go from pulling off a move like that to just handing yourself back over not 30 seconds later? Figure it out, Dave. Are you making an escape attempt or not? This is no time to second guess your actions. He didn't even know where you were. You could have snuck back towards the car under the cover of darkness, jumped in the driver's seat, and sped the hell out of there while this guy was busy ranting like a lunatic in the middle of the road. Not an ideal outcome, to say the least. So let's take a look at what you achieved. You're still stuck, but now you're hurt, and now this guy not only knows your address, but the room number that your wife's staying in at the hospital? Fantastic! Why don't you just give the guy her exact coordinates while you're at it? You let him use her to lure you out, but who's to say when he's done with you that he won't still go after your family anyway? He sure does seem like that kind of guy. You've probably got exactly one chance left before he flips out and kills you, and you better make it count. Somehow you blew it at the most crucial moment and only made things worse for everyone involved. I think you're already well aware, but David, you up. A little while later, the man starts asking David about his marriage, wanting to know if he feels like he and his wife are happy together. Aggravated, David assures him that sometimes he feels like they're the only happy people that he knows, saying that they've worked out the secret. This leaves the man quiet for a minute until he chimes in that he's never been happy, which he blames on his allergies. Ever since he was a child, he'd had dreams of a mysterious figure who he calls the Mucus Man, that would find him in the middle of the night and jam his nose full of boogers. Unsure how to respond to this strange confession, David here just keeps on driving. Eventually, they end up passing by a local diner and the man orders him to pull over. As they park the car, the man hands David a rag and tells him to clean some of the blood from his face, before leading him inside while holding the gun to his back through his jacket pocket. The place is mostly empty except for a few customers, but this trucker sitting at the bar starts grilling them down from the moment that they walk in. To everyone else, it seems like just another quiet night, but they have no idea that the whole place is going to be up in flames by the time that these two leave. The man sits down and hands David a menu, getting annoyed when he sees that it says no substitutions. While they're waiting, he begins to explain more about why he's doing this in the first place. According to him, there's a very important businessman from Boston waiting for David's arrival. Originally, they were planning on bringing David all the way back to the West Coast, but the client couldn't wait and decided to fly out to a private airport in Boulder City, which is where they're going to meet him. Noticing that the waitress is on her way over, the man tells David to say that he fell down the stairs if she starts asking questions about his face. They both order a cup of coffee, but when she tells them about the current tuna melt special, the man wants to know if he can swap out the mozzarella cheese for cheddar instead. She points to the no substitutions sign, saying that it's the owner's rules, but jokes that she might be able to sneak him some cheddar anyway before leaving to get the coffees. That's when the man starts telling David a story about a bookkeeper in Boston who worked for a man named Jacob Sullivan. While there, he met a girl, they had a baby, and things seemed to be going well. After a while, the bookkeeper noticed that one of Sullivan's partners was taking an extra cut on the side. And so one night while his wife and daughter were away, he invited the associate over for some drinks. Once his guard was down, Sullivan sent over some goons to kill the man, which is exactly what he says is going to happen to David when they finally get to where they're going. The waitress comes back just as the story ends, and the man orders a tuna melt with the cheese swapped out, of course. When she gets to David, he says that he isn't hungry, but the man insists that he get something, shouting at him and causing a scene until he finally orders the same thing. Once they're alone again, the man starts picking apart David's backstory. He says that, in his experience, people always use the family excuse when they're looking for sympathy, but he's surprised that David would go that route given what he really knows about him. Pulling out a flask and pouring it into the coffee, he admits that he doesn't usually drink after dark. However, today is a special occasion, and the man wants him to ask why, but David only sits there in silence. Instead of going along with it, David still insists that he's got the wrong guy and begs to know who the man thinks that he really is. This makes him furious, and he stares at David with an insane look in his eyes until he finally manages to calm himself down. Changing the subject, the man starts going off about it being the witching hour, but David almost immediately interrupts him, causing him to fly into a psychotic rage. The trucker notices the commotion and stands up to confront him, but the man shouts at him to sit back down. With a tense silence falling over the whole restaurant, suddenly the man punches David straight in the face, slamming him down and cuffing him to the table while he's stunned. Okay, this guy's about to go on a rampage, but David here had a chance to stop it if he'd only acted more quickly. His opportunities were limited, but there was one item that stuck out to me that he might have been able to capitalize on, and it was the humble cup of coffee. As soon as the waitress brought that out, David could have flung the burning hot liquid into the kidnapper's face, blinding him and making it much more difficult to shoot. You see, while the man was stunned, that would have been the moment to come flying across the table like a spider monkey and unleash a feral whooping that only a man who's been staring down the barrel of a gun can deliver. Unfortunately, he missed his chance once again, and now he's stunned, handcuffed, and essentially powerless to stop whatever's about to happen unless he can somehow get himself free. Hopefully, he gets another opportunity to fight back before this guy decides to finish the job. Drawing his pistol, he goes over and tells the trucker at the bar not to move or he'll shoot him, before making his way back into the kitchen where he finds the two employees. After tearing the landline out of the wall, he makes them both hand over their cell phones and throws them into the hot grease so that they won't be able to call anyone for help. The man sits back down at the booth and tells David that he wants to play a game called Stop the Phony. The rules are simple. David tells him the truth about who he really is right now, and if he doesn't, then he'll kill the waitress, the trucker, and anyone else who happens to walk in. That's when a woman and her young daughter enter the diner, and the man gets dangerously excited. He gives David one more chance to tell the truth, but he swears that he's got the wrong guy. Furious, the man tells him to get ready because he's about to start shooting, which is when David makes his move. Crossing the table, he headbutts the man as hard as he can, stunning him briefly. All at once, the waitress drops their plates and runs for cover, while the trucker makes a break for the exit. The man opens fire, but David smacks his hand down, causing him to miss. Annoyed, he strikes David in the face, before standing up and taking aim at the trucker, hitting him in the back just as he's about to reach the door. While the man reloads his weapon, David whispers for the mother and child to run, but they're too terrified to move. After making sure that the trucker is dead, the man walks over to the booth and takes aim at the innocent family. Desperate to save them, David finally gives in, admitting that he's exactly who the man is looking for. Coming back over to their table, he throws David to the ground and begins pummeling him over and over again, before leaning in close and calling him James, saying that this is all his fault. Leaving him there, the man makes his way back to the kitchen and lets the family go free without any trouble. Going out through the back door, he catches the cook running for his life and shoots him once in the back. Next, he heads into the women's bathroom where he finds the waitress hiding in one of the stalls. But after thinking it over, he decides to let her go. Meanwhile, David sees his phone lying on the ground just out of reach and manages to drag it over with his foot, immediately dialing 911. After explaining what's going on, he starts kicking the table leg as hard as he can, desperately trying to set himself free. Back in the kitchen, the man turns on the gas and lights every burner on the stove before sparking a cigarette. Grabbing a bottle of 151 rum from the shelf, he tosses it into the fire, causing the place to instantly go up in flames. David finally manages to get himself free, but it's too late, and the man comes walking out as the whole building starts to burn down. As he runs for the door, the man shoots and hits him in the leg, but he still manages to get out to the parking lot where he decides to take cover behind a car. Taking off his belt, he quickly wraps it around his leg and uses it to stop the bleeding. After a moment, the man comes out with more bottles of alcohol that he's turned into Molotov cocktails and starts chunking them at the cars, hoping to find where David is hiding. While he's distracted, David moves behind a trailer instead, staying just out of range as the man torches everything in the parking lot. Once he's out of bottles, the man decides to call David's phone, and although he quickly shuts it off, he can tell from the sound of the ringing that he's still somewhere nearby. That's when he says that he wants to finish telling him the bookkeeper's story. While searching between the trailers, he explains that, as the stealing associate was being killed, the bookkeeper's wife accidentally came home ahead of schedule and ended up witnessing the whole thing. It turns out that he was the bookkeeper all along, and now his wife had become a liability, which is where David here came into play, although at the time he was going by the name of James Levine. As David sneaks under another trailer, he's suddenly grabbed by the cook, who's badly wounded but somehow still alive. Instead of trying to help him, he only sneaks away, and the man shoots him dead just a few seconds later. Just then, David charges out from behind, knocking the gun out of his hands. The two battle it out, hand to hand, and at first it looks like David might actually win the fight. But the man distracts him by revealing that he knows what room his wife is in at the hospital, taking him by surprise and knocking him off before grabbing his gun back. Now that he has control of the situation again, the man explains that he never kills mothers, but if David keeps it up, he's going to break his rule. Alternatively, if David gets back in the car right now, then he promises that they'll stay away from his wife, giving him his word that he means what he says. With no other choice, David limps back over to his car and the two speed away, just moments before the police arrive on the scene. Okay, for a minute there, it was starting to look like David actually had the upper hand. The police were on their way, and he was even winning the fight, but he let this creep get in his head, and ended up dropping the ball at the last minute. Now he's once again right back where he started, and there were a few things that he could have done differently during the fight. This one's gonna sound crazy, but hear me out. When the kidnapper here was chasing him around the parking lot with the Molotovs, David could have waited until he had one lit and then thrown one of his shoes straight at the bottle, knocking it out of his hands and engulfing the man in flames. It's a 1 in a million shot, but this is a 1 in a million kind of night, so it couldn't hurt to take the chance. More realistically speaking, while the two were scrapping it out after David made him drop the gun, he should have gone straight for the weapon instead of getting caught up giving the guy a beatdown. As soon as the man had the opportunity, he reached for the gun himself, ending the fight, and that's because he's smart, but David, unfortunately, is not. He got distracted, and it's gonna cost him. But if David has anything going for him at all, it's that he's somehow still not dead yet. He better get it together soon though, because it looks like they're nearing the end of the line. Still acting like he doesn't know, David asks the man what ended up happening to his wife. He explains that this fixer, James Levine, told him that he needed to get his wife under control. Knowing what James was capable of, he decided that his only option was to get his family out of the city before it was too late. The man left the house to get some supplies, but by the time that he came back, his wife and daughter were already dead and their entire house was up in flames. David here says that he's accepted that he's going to die tonight, but wants the man to know that he really isn't James Levine. Furious, the man shouts at him for still keeping up the act, which causes him to go into a coughing fit. David realizes that the man is also dying from lung cancer and never intended to survive the night himself. Just then, they notice a police officer speeding up the highway behind them. The man readies himself before holding the gun to the side of David's head, but right when he's about to pull the trigger, David says that he needs to know why he didn't kill him the second that he got in the car. He explains that he wanted to hear his confession first, which is when David finally admits that it's all true and Sullivan really did order the hit on the man's wife. Suddenly, David flicks his cigarette into the man's face, causing him to miss his shot as the car crashes and flips into a ditch on the side of the road. Okay, just when I was thinking that you'd never figure it out, you pull a sick move like that and completely redeem yourself. Props, David, but it took you long enough, that's for sure. I really can't say that there's much else you could have done here, although maybe trying something like that before you had a pistol pointed directly at the side of your head might have made for better timing. It looks like you were wearing your seatbelt, so hopefully you survived the crash and he didn't, and you can finally get back to the hospital, although it looks like now you'll be going as a patient and not a visitor. When the man wakes up, he sees two officers rushing towards them, but David shoots and kills them both, crouching down next to him. He confesses that he never meant to kill the man's daughter, but accidentally hit her in the crossfire. Overwhelmed with guilt, he turned to drinking until he finally met his wife and turned his life around. When his firstborn died, he thought of it as God settling the score, but could still see their faces when he went to sleep every night. Then, when he eventually had his son, it was like getting back the life that he wrongfully took. As crazy as it is, David feels like this whole experience finally gave him closure, and says that he wishes he could have done the same for the man. Crouching over him, he holds his forearm into his throat and presses down, choking the man to death. Standing up, David wipes off his gun and puts it into the man's hand. In the wreckage, he finds the Ace of Spades card that started it all and tucks it away in his shirt pocket. Taking out his phone, he listens to a voicemail from his wife, telling him that they had a little girl and everything is going to be fine. As backup arrives, he repeats to himself that he's David Chamberlain over and over, standing with his hands in the air as the officers close in. But what would you do if you were cruising along in your car headed to the hospital to go see your wife who's about to give birth and some random red-haired Nick Cage just hopped in the backseat of your car? Would you flip out and try to do everything you could to get him out of the backseat, or would you go along with the story in hopes that he would spare your life? Let us know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe, and check out the How to Beat playlist for more videos just like this. I think I'm forgetting something. Oh yeah, have a damn good day.